Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom, Module 2, The American West, Lesson 28. So today we are going to be answering the content question, our pizza bite question. What do you notice and wonder about John Henry by Lester? So we are moving on to a second version about the legend of John Henry. So looking at the cover of this version, what are some things that you are noticing on this cover? And what are some things that you are wondering about? What are some questions that you have? So take a second to look at the cover. And in the puzzle, I want you to tell me one thing you notice in this cover and one wonder that you have. So one notice that I have is that John Henry, I'm assuming this is John Henry has two hammers. Just like we learned about in the first version, he worked with two hammers when he was racing against the steam drill. I wonder, what is this little circle at the top? I wonder, what is this silver circle? Do you guys know what that is? This is a Caldecott award-winning book. So this book is very special, and it was very well written and illustrated and won the Caldecott Honor Award. So we are going to be exploring a new version, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you that we will be taking a brain break halfway through this book. It is a long book, but it gives us more details about John Henry's adventures. As we're reading, I want you to think about things that are similar and different from the first version that we have read. So go ahead and get yourself in a space where you are focused on the book. You're in a quiet space. Your eyes are on the screen, and I will let you know when we are taking that brain break. Here we go. John Henry by Julius Lester, pictures by Jerry Pinkney. You have probably heard of John Henry, or maybe you heard about him but don't know the ins and outs of his comings and goings. Well, that's why I'm going to tell you about him. When John Henry was born, birds came from everywhere to see him. The bears and panthers and moose and deer and rabbits and squirrels and even a unicorn came out of the woods to see him. And instead of the sun tending to his business and going to bed, it was peeping out from behind the moon's skirts, trying to get a glimpse of the new baby. There's John Henry. There's all the animals. The unicorn. Before long, Mama and Papa come out on the porch to show off their brand new baby. The birds oohed and the animals awed at how handsome the baby was. Somewhere in the middle of one of the oohs and ahs, that baby jumped out of his mama's arm and started growing. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until his head and shoulders busted through the roof, which was over the porch. John Henry thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He laughed so loud the sun got scared. It scurried from behind the moon skirts and went to bed, which is where it should have been all the while. So there's John Henry growing. There's the unicorn. There's the sun. The next morning, John Henry was up at sunrise. The sun wasn't. He was tired and had decided to sleep in. John Henry wasn't going to have none of that. He hollered up into the sky, "Get up from there! I got things to do and I need light to do 'em by." The sun yawned, washed his face, flossed and brushed its teeth, and hurried up over the horizon. That day, John Henry helped his papa rebuild the porch he had busted through, added a wing onto the house with an indoor swimming pool and one of them jacuzzis. After lunch, he chopped down an acre of trees and split them into fireplace logs and still had time for a nap before supper. We're going to pause. already. What are some things you are noticing about this book, this version of John Henry? Tell me one thing you have noticed so far in these last few pages in the puzzle. So, something I'm noticing is that John Henry grew up in a day. He grew up as a young boy in one day. And it said that they added a wing onto their house with an indoor swimming pool. Those are some crazy things. I wonder why this author is telling this story in such a magical way. The next day, John Henry went to town. He met up with the meanest man in the state, ferret-faced Freddie, sitting on his big white horse. You know what he was doing? He was thinking of mean things to do. Ferret-faced Freddie was so mean, he cried if he had a nice thought. John Henry said, "Freddie, I'll make you a bet. Let's have a race. You on your horse, me on my legs. If you and your horse win, you can work me as hard as you want for a whole year. If I win, you have to be nice for a year." Ferret-faced Freddie laughed an evil laugh. Ha, 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 ha. "It's a deal, John Henry." His voice sounded like bat wings on tombstones. The next morning, folks lined up along the way the race would go. John Henry was ready. Bare-faced Freddie and his horse were ready. Bang! The race was on. My great-granddaddy's brother's cousin, sister-in-law, uncle's aunt was there that morning. She said everybody saw Ferret-faced Freddie ride by on his big white horse, and they were sure enough moving. Didn't nobody see John Henry? That's because he was so fast, the wind was out of breath trying to keep up with him. When Ferret-faced Freddie crossed the finish line, John Henry was already on the other side, sitting in a rocking chair and drinking a soda mom. After that, Ferret-faced Freddie was so nice, everyone called him Frederick the Friendly. John Henry decided it was time for him to go on down the big road. He went home and told his mama and daddy goodbye. His daddy said, "You got to have something to make your way in the world with, son. These belong to your great-granddaddy." And he gave him two 20-pound sledgehammers with 4-foot handles made of whalebone. A day or so later, John Henry saw a crew building a road. At least that's what they were doing until they came on a boulder right smack dab where the road was supposed to go. This was no ordinary boulder. It was as hard as anger and so big round, it took half a week for a tall man to walk from one side to the other. John Henry offered to lend them a hand. "That's all right, we'll put some dynamite to it." John Henry smiled to himself. "Whatever you say." The road crew planted dynamite all around the rock and set it off. Kerboom! Blamity, blamity, boom, boom, bang, boom, bang! That dynamite made so much racket, the Almighty looked over the parapets of heaven and hollered, "It's getting too noisy down there." The dynamite kicked up so much dirt and dust, it got dark. The moon thought night had caught her napping, and she hurried out so fast she almost bumped into the sun, who was still climbing the steep hill toward noontime. When all the commotion from the dynamite was over, the road crew was amazed. The boulder was still there. In fact, the dynamite hadn't knocked even a chip off it. The crew didn't know what to do. Then they heard a rumbling noise. They looked round. It was John Henry laughing. He said, "If you gentlemen would give me a little room, I got some work to do." "Don't see how you can do what dynamite couldn't," said the boss of the crew. John Henry chuckled. "Just watch me." He swung one of his hammers round and round his head. It made such a wind the leaves blew off the trees and birds fell out of the sky. Ring! The hammer hit the boulder. That boulder shivered like you do on a cold winter morning when it looks like the school bus is never going to come. Ring! The boulder shivered like the morning when freedom came to the slaves. John Henry picked up his other hammer. He swung one hammer in a circle over his head. As soon as it hit the rock, ring! The hammer in his left hand started to make a circle and ring! Soon the ring of one hammer followed the ring of the other one so closely it sounded like they were falling at the same time. Ring, 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 ring. John Henry sang and he hammered and the air danced and the rainbow shimmered and the earth shook and rolled from the blows of the hammer. Finally, it was quiet. Slowly, the dust cleared. Folks could not believe their eyes. The boulder was gone. In its place was the prettiest and straightest road they had ever seen. Not only had John Henry pulverized the boulder into pebbles, he had finished building the road. In the distance, where the new road connected to the main one, the road crew saw John Henry waving goodbye, a hammer on each shoulder, the rainbow draped around him like love. So there's the rainbow. All right, we're going to pause for a second. Tell me in the Ed puzzle, what is a question that you have so far about this version of John Henry? I wonder why the author is making nature sound like people. Why is he making the sun sound like a person, the wind, the moon? I wonder why he is adding all of these really magical details to his version of John Henry's story. John Henry went on his way. He had heard that any man good with a hammer could find work building the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad through West Virginia. That was where he had been going when he stopped to build the road. The next day, John Henry arrived at the railroad. However, work had stopped. The railroad tracks had to go through a mountain. In such a mountain. Next to it, even John Henry felt small. But a worker told John Henry about a new machine they were going to use to tunnel through the mountain. It was called a steam drill. It can hammer faster and harder than 10 men, and it never has to stop and rest. The next day, the boss arrived with the steam drill. John Henry said to him, "Let's have a contest. Your steam drill against me and my hammers." The man laughed. "I've heard you're the best there ever was, John Henry, but even you can't hammer a machine." "Let's find out," John Henry answered. Boss shrugged. "Don't make me no never mind. You start on the other side of the mountain. I'll start the steam drill over here. Whoever gets to the middle first is the winner." We're going to pause here. Tell me something that you noticed on this page. What did you notice in the words? Or what do you notice about this illustration? Something that I'm noticing is John Henry is so much taller and looks so much stronger than the other men. I also noticed that it talked about a contest with a steam drill. We have heard that before, haven't we? The next morning, all was still. The birds weren't singing and the roosters weren't crowing. When the son didn't hear the rooster, he wondered if something was wrong. So he rose up a couple minutes early to see. What he saw was a mountain as big as hurt feelings. On one side was a big machine hooked up to hoses. It was belching smoke and steam. As the machine attacked the mountain, rocks and dirt and underbrush flew into the air. On the other side was John Henry. Next to the mountain, he didn't look much bigger than a wish that wasn't going to come true. He had a 20-pound hammer in each hand and muscles hard as wisdom in each arm. As he swung them through the air, they shone like silver, and when the hammers hit the rock, they rang like gold. Before long, tongues of fire leaped out with each blow. So here's that mountain. Here's John Henry. And here on this side is a steam drill. On the other side, the boss of the steam drill felt the mountain shudder. He got scared and hollered, "I believe this mountain is caving in." From the darkness inside the mountain came a deep voice. It's just my hammer sucking wind. Just my hammer sucking wind. There wasn't enough room inside the tunnel for the rainbow, so it wrapped itself around the mountain on the side where John Henry was. All through the night, John Henry and the steam drill went at it. In the light from the tongues of fire shooting out of the tunnel from John Henry's hammer blows, folks could see the rainbow wrapped around the mountain like a shawl. The sun came up extra early the next morning to see who was winning. Just as it did, John Henry broke through and met the steam drill. The boss of the steam drill was flabbergasted. John Henry had come 1.25 miles. The steam drill had only come a quarter. Folks were cheering and yelling, John Henry! John Henry! John Henry walked out of the tunnel into the sunlight, raised his arms over his head, a hammer in each hand. The rainbow slid off the mountain and around his shoulders. With a smile, John Henry's eyes closed, and slowly he fell to the ground. John Henry was dead. He had hammered so hard and so fast and so long that his big heart had burst. Everybody was silent for a minute. Then came the sound of soft crying. Some said it came from the moon. Another one said she saw the sun shed a tear. Then something strange happened. Afterwards, folks swore the rainbow whispered it. I don't know, but it was a whisper or a thought. Everyone had the same knowing at the same moment. Dying ain't important. Everybody does that. What matters is how well you do your living. First, one person started clapping, then another and another. Soon, everybody was clapping. The next morning, the sun got everybody up early to say goodbye to John Henry. They put him on a flatbed railroad car, and the train made its way slowly out of the mountain. All along the way, folks lined both sides of the track, and they were cheering and shouting through their tears, John Henry! John Henry! John Henry's body was taken to Washington, D.C. In this illustration, guys, you can see John Henry's casket on the train. Some say he was buried on the White House lawn late one night while the president and the Mrs. President was asleep. I don't know about none of that. What I do know is this. If you walk by the White House late at night, stand real still and listen real closely, folks say you just might hear a deep voice singing, I got a rainbow, ring, ring, tied round my shoulder, ring, ring. It ain't gonna rain. No, it ain't going to rain. Ring, ring. Right. So, wow, that was such a cool version of John Henry's story. I noticed that there were extra events that happened in that story. There were other contests, there were other things that John Henry did in this version than we learned in the first version. What is something that you noticed after listening to this version all the way through? What is something you noticed? Tell me in the puzzle. So some examples of things that we could have noticed is that it seemed like the writer was talking to us as we were reading. It sounded like he was the one telling the story to us in his own words. I also noticed that this story starts with animals and nature being excited about John Henry being born. I also felt like this story was more of a tall tale than the first version. There were some magical elements that seemed really hard to believe in this version than in the first version. I also noticed that he did so much work. It was impossible to do all that work in one day. Like, remember when he made the road through the boulder? Oh my goodness, that was such a cool part of the story. So there were lots of things that I noticed that were similar and different. Now, I want you to tell me in the puzzle, what is a question you have? What is a wonder you have? So, for example, I heard some new words that I had never heard before. For example, what's a soda mom? What's a soda mom? I wonder what that is. And I wonder, is it possible for someone to outrun a horse? And why is there a rainbow around John Henry throughout the story? Why is there a rainbow around him? In the puzzle, I want you to tell me a wonder that you had after listening to this story. All right, so I can't wait to see the wonders that you had. So, in the last version that we read, the first version of John Henry, an American legend, you guys told me, what was it about this story that told you it was a legend? So I want you to think, what is an element or what is something that happened in this version that lets you know it's a tall tale or a legend? What is something magical or unbelievable that you saw that happened in this story? Tell me in the puzzle. So something that gave me clues that this was a tall tale is that John Henry grew from a baby into a teenager in one day. That was something that told me it was a tall tale. Something else that told me this was a tall tale is that the sun and the sun was brushing its teeth and yawning, and John Henry was talking to the sun. So there were so many cool elements that made this story magical, but told us about a very unique character. All right, Smarties. So just like we did a writing task for Johnny Appleseed, we are going to be doing a writing task for John Henry. But before we do that, I want you to take a 5-minute brain break. So if you are seeing this in the ed puzzle, it is going to pause for you to take a 5-minute brain break. And then I want you to come back and finish up this lesson. So get some dancing in. I had a friend that was running laps in his house. Give yourself a nice little brain massage, do some yoga, get a snack or a drink. I'm going to take a Diet Coke break. All right, so you are back with me now, and now we're going to be talking about writing. So as we are thinking and as we are preparing our minds for our next writing task, we're going to talk about topic-specific words. Remember when we were talking about topic-specific words when we were learning about Journey of a Pioneer? And we talked about how topic-specific words tell us exactly who or what we are learning about. So for example, we talked about how people traveled through the West on covered wagons. People is not a topic-specific word. What kind of people? Where were they from? So we could change people to pioneers. Pioneers traveled out west on covered wagons. That gives me specific clues or specific ideas of who I am reading about. So we are going to look at a paragraph that is comparing that is talking about our Johnny Appleseed story. And these words that are underlined are words that are not topic specific. As I am reading this, I want you to think, how can we change these underlined words to a topic specific word? You ready? All right. Aliki and Stephen Kellogg tell the story of Johnny Appleseed. Let's pause for a second. What could I change the word story to? We learned that these were, tell me in the puzzle, what could I change story to? Legend. Aliki and Stephen Kellogg tell the legend of Johnny Appleseed. Both books show how John Chapman moved west to plant a bunch of apple trees. He moved west. I think we could use a more topic-specific word, don't you? I think journeyed would be better. And what about bunch of apple trees? What is a large group of apple trees called? That's a collective noun. What collective noun should we put there? Instead of bunch of apple trees, we should put, tell me in the puzzle. The collective noun for a group of apple trees is an orchard. So we could say both books show how John Chapman journeyed west to plant orchards. But the versions had many differences. Aliki says Appleseed moved west after people were settled. What kind of people settled out west? Look at this underlined word. Who were the people that settled? Tell me in the puzzle. The pioneers. The pioneers settled west. Kellogg said he went to the new places before the pioneers. New places. Where did he go as he was traveling? The frontier. So we could say Kellogg says he went to the frontier before the pioneers. Also, Aliki says that Indians helped Appleseed when he was sick. In the Kellogg version, people helped him get well. Who were the people that helped Johnny Appleseed in the second version? It wasn't Native Americans. Who helped Johnny Appleseed in the second version of the story? Settlers. So we need to change people to settlers. In the Kellogg version, settlers helped him get well. Authors tell different versions of Johnny Appleseed's story. So guys, as we were reading this, think about those underlined words. Those were not specific words. If I were reading this as a reader, I don't know who exactly I am learning about. But when I use topic-specific words in my writing, it helps my reader know exactly who I am talking about. So our goal for this next writing is to use topic-specific words when answering our focus question about John Henry. All right, Smarties, and let's finish up with a deep dive. So we are going to be talking about vocabulary words, and we're specifically going to be talking about shades of meaning. So we're going to be talking about the shades of meaning of sound words. So the words that we're going to be talking about is groaned, shouted, roared, soundlessly, whisper, murmur, and mumble. What did I do with my voice when I read those words? Some of them were really loud, and then some of them were really quiet. So as I am reading the section, I want you to think about how I read these words, okay? How I read these words that describe different sounds. All right, get ready. Here we go. A hush settled over the hills. The sky swirled soundlessly round the moon. The river stopped murmuring. The wind stopped whispering. And the frogs and the owls and the crickets fell silent, all watching and waiting and listening. How did I read that paragraph? How did I read those words? Tell me in the puzzle. I read them really quietly. When I read them quietly, I know that my setting, it is really quiet at this moment. Let's see what happens next. Then the river roared, the wind whistled and sang, the frogs croaked, the owls hooted, and all the crickets chirped. Welcome, welcome, echoed through the hills. How did I read those sound words? How did I read that section of the text? Tell me in the puzzle. I read it really loudly. So when we are reading books, writers use shades of meaning. They use words that describe sound, but they use different meanings of that word to tell you how it would sound. So roared is going to sound a lot louder than whispering. Right? So these words have shades of meaning. These are all words that talk about sound, but The sound goes from quietest to loudest, right? So we can create picture movies in our heads when we understand the meaning of these words. So let's look at this line. So if you notice, I have a line that goes from silent to roared. So these are all words that move across this line. There's some words that are going to be closer to meaning that it's silent. And there's going to be some words that are closer to roared. So let's look at the first one together. Soundlessly. Where do we think soundlessly would go? Soundlessly. If something was soundless, would it go with silent or roared? It would go with silent, right? If something is soundless, that means it doesn't have any sound. That means it is silent. What about shrieked? What does that go close to? It goes close to roared, right? If I shriek, I'm making a really loud sound. That is going to be really close to roared. All right, what about whisper? Whisper, whisper, whisper. What is that going to be close to? It's going to be close to silent. It's going to be close to silent. It's not quieter than soundless, but it's really close to being silent. What about murmur? If I murmur, I want you to murmur with me. Ready? Murmur, 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 murmur. If I'm murmuring, I'm talking quietly. In the Ed puzzle, I want you to tell me, is murmur going to go closer to silent or roared? Tell me in the Ed puzzle. It's going to go pretty close with silent, right? It's still quiet. It's not as quiet as a whisper, but it's still closer to that side. What about shouted? If I shouted to the rooftops, where is that going to go? It's going to go next to shrieked, right? So I'm going to put shrieked up here. And shouted is going to be right there with it. What about groaned? Groaned. Where do you think that's going to go? Is it going to go all the way over here with silent? Is it going to go with roared? Or if something is groaning, groan with me, right? Is it closer to silent, roared, or somewhere in the middle? Tell me in the puzzle. It's going to be somewhere near the middle, right? So I'm going to put this right down here. I'm going to put it kind of in between both. And what about mumble? If someone mumbles, mumble with me, ready? I'm making really quiet words, right? Quiet words or noises. If I'm mumbling, Miss Mason's going to have a great day. I'm talking really quietly, right? It's hard to hear me. So that is going to go closer to silent. It's kind of in the middle too. So what do you notice about these words? How we put them in order? They went from quietest to loudest. So we can use different words that have the same meaning, but give it a different type of meaning. So we know that all of these words describe how something sounds or sounds that are being made, but different words that have the same overall meaning could have more details to it. All right, Smarties, that is going to be it for lesson 28. I can't wait to keep doing some exploring with this version of John Henry. It is so fun. All right, Smarties, remember, keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things, and don't be scared to try something hard or something new. Happy learning, Smarties.